Have you ever had someone throw a full-on wedding in your yard without asking? Sounds like something out of a sitcom, but for one Redditor, it was painfully real. This bizarre and hilarious tale comes straight from r/entitled people, where one user shared how a particularly audacious HOA Karen decided to take community entitlement to a whole new level. Without so much as a heads-up or courtesy knock, she organized an entire wedding celebration right in the middle of his private property. Decorations, tables, chairs, guests, everything, as if she owned the place. The main character of the story is a down-to-earth guy living in a quiet neighborhood governed by a homeowners association. He's the kind of person who prefers to keep to himself, mind his farm, and live peacefully. His backyard? A spacious green field where his cows graze and relax. Despite his laid-back nature, he isn't the type to be pushed around, especially when someone crosses the line so blatantly. When Karen ignored his protests and insisted the land was community property, he knew he had to respond. But instead of getting angry or calling the cops, he came up with a much more memorable and moving way to deal with the situation. It all started on a quiet Thursday morning when the narrator noticed something strange happening on his property. He lived on a decent plot of land at the edge of a suburban neighborhood, a peaceful place where he raised a small group of cows and enjoyed a low-key life away from the chaos of city living. His land, while technically within the reach of the HOA, was clearly private and fenced off. So when he saw a group of unfamiliar people setting up what looked like tents, chairs, and floral arches in his backyard, he thought he was seeing things. He walked over to investigate and quickly realized that someone was preparing for a full-blown wedding. Confused and more than a little annoyed, he asked one of the workers what was going on. They told him they were setting up for a wedding scheduled for Saturday and that Karen had said this space was already approved. At first, he thought it had to be a mistake. Maybe they had the wrong yard. Maybe someone misread an address. But no, everything was labeled with his exact address. So, he did what any reasonable person would do. He went to find Karen, a notorious busybody on the HOA board, someone with a long track record of enforcing rules for others while ignoring them herself. When he confronted her, she responded with a wave of her hand and a dismissive smile. "Oh, it's just a small ceremony," she said. "Your backyard is perfect for it. Nobody uses it anyway. Besides, it's technically within HOA grounds." He was floored. She didn't ask. She didn't even notify him. She just assumed she could use someone else's private land for a massive, likely noisy, disruptive event. When he told her she didn't have his permission, she rolled her eyes and muttered something about community spirit and how he should be honored to let such a beautiful event happen there. She even hinted that if he made a fuss, he could be fined for being uncooperative with HOA-approved functions. Now, the narrator wasn't a confrontational guy. He didn't like making a scene. But he also wasn't a pushover. He thought about calling the police, but he knew that could spiral into a messy legal fight with the HOA. Instead, he decided to play it smart and just a little bit wicked. He let the preparations continue. He didn't argue further. He watched as more decorations were brought in, as the stage was set, and as the fancy white chairs were arranged in neat rows right on his well-maintained grass. All the while, he kept his usual routine, feeding his cows, walking the perimeter, and smiling politely at the people who were clearly trespassing. Nobody suspected a thing. Then came Saturday. The wedding was in full swing. Guests had arrived in formal attire, the string quartet was playing, and Karen was walking around like she owned the place, barking orders and sipping champagne. The bride, her daughter, stood under a floral arch with a proud grin, waiting for the ceremony to begin. Everything looked picture perfect. That's when he quietly opened the gate to the pasture. The cows, curious and more than a little eager, wandered in. At first, a few guests laughed. "How rustic," someone said. But the novelty quickly turned into chaos. The cows began to explore with their noses. They sniffed at the hors d'oeuvres, knocked over flower arrangements, and one particularly bold heifer stomped right through the aisle runner, leaving muddy hoofprints in her wake. The bride screamed. Someone tried to chase the cows away, but as any farmer knows, that only made them more agitated. One cow knocked over a table. Another found the cake and took a large bite before someone could shoo her off. Karen was furious. She stormed over to the narrator, who was leaning on a fence post watching the scene unfold with a calm expression. She shouted about how he had ruined her daughter's special day and how she would be reporting him to the HOA. He simply raised an eyebrow and asked, "What are you talking about? You said the yard was common HOA property. I assumed you were letting everyone use it." So did the cows. She sputtered, tried to argue, but she knew she had nothing. She hadn't gotten permission. She hadn't filed any HOA paperwork. She had taken over private property and now had to deal with the consequences. The wedding was cut short. Guests left in a mixture of horror and embarrassment. The cleanup crew arrived early, trying to salvage what they could from the muddy, chewed-up remains of what was supposed to be a fairy tale event. And Karen? She avoided eye contact with everyone. But it didn't end there. Word of what happened spread quickly through the neighborhood. Many residents had grown tired of Karen's behavior, her high-handed decisions, her double standards, her constant meddling. The wedding fiasco was the last straw. At the next HOA meeting, several members called for her to step down from her position. Her claim that the land was common property didn't hold up under scrutiny. Maps, property deeds, and boundary lines all confirmed what the narrator had said from the beginning: it was his land. The HOA formally reprimanded her, and while she wasn't removed immediately, her influence dwindled considerably. As for the narrator, he became a bit of a local legend. People he had never spoken to before started waving at him, bringing over baked goods, and laughing about those party-crashing cows. His subtle act of rebellion became a favorite neighborhood story, passed around with increasing exaggeration and humor. He didn't hold a grudge. He wasn't out for revenge. But he did feel a quiet satisfaction every time he looked out over his pasture, knowing he had stood his ground without raising his voice and let nature do the talking. And just in case anyone else ever got any bright ideas, he hung a small sign on the gate that read, "Private property. Cows have the right of way."